In the year 1786, the state of Rhode Island in New England was a place where the dense forests seemed to whisper secrets, and the fog that rolled in from the Atlantic Ocean shrouded the land in perpetual gloom. The colony, predominantly inhabited by the British, was thriving and bustling, but beneath the surface, something sinister was at play. It started with the strange deaths. At first, they were sporadic and easily dismissed as unfortunate coincidences, but as the months went by, the authorities began to notice a disturbing pattern. People were wasting away at an alarming rate, their bodies shriveling as if drained by some unseen force. Within 6 months, the victims would become unrecognizable, emaciated and gaunt. Their eyes grew unnaturally large and glowed with a strange, eerie light. Their skin, once vibrant, turned a sickly shade of gray, resembling ash, and the cough and agonizing, choking cough became a dreadful harbinger of their impending doom. The townsfolk were terrified. Whispers of supernatural causes spread like wildfire. Old wives' tales about vampires, ancient creatures that fed on the life force of humans, were resurrected from the depths of folklore. Desperation drove people to seek answers in the most unlikely places. They turned to folklore and superstition, hoping to find some way to protect themselves from the unseen terror that stalked their nights. In the small village of Exeter, nestled deep within the forests of Rhode Island, the fear was palpable. Every night, the villagers would barricade their doors and windows, huddling together for protection. Among them was a young woman named Mary Brown. She had lost her father to the strange illness and now watched helplessly as her brother, Joseph, began to exhibit the same terrifying symptoms. Mary's mother, a strong-willed woman named Abigail, refused to accept her children's fate without a fight. She sought the help of a reclusive local doctor, Dr. Elias Thornton, who was known for his unconventional methods and deep knowledge of the occult. Thornton was a tall, gaunt man with a piercing gaze that seemed to see right through you. He had lived in Exeter for many years, a figure of both respect and fear. Upon examining Joseph, Dr. Thornton's expression grew grave. "This is no ordinary illness," he said, his voice a low, ominous whisper. "There is something dark at work here, something that defies the natural order." Desperate for answers, Abigail pressed him for more information. Thornton reluctantly revealed an ancient text he had come across during his studies, a tome that spoke of creatures that fed on the essence of the living. According to the text, these creatures, vampires, were nearly impossible to kill. The only way to protect oneself was to identify and destroy the creature responsible for the curse. As the days turned into weeks, Joseph's condition worsened. His eyes shone with an unnatural brightness, and his skin grew more ashen with each passing day. Thornton, Mary, and Abigail began to investigate the deaths more closely, hoping to find a common thread that would lead them to the source of the curse. They discovered that each victim had been buried in a secluded part of the village cemetery, a place avoided by the locals due to its reputation for being haunted. Armed with this knowledge, they decided to exhume the bodies, hoping to find evidence of the vampire's existence. Under the cover of darkness, the trio made their way to the cemetery. The air was thick with tension, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. As they dug up the graves, they were horrified to find that the bodies were eerily well preserved, their eyes wide open and glowing faintly in the moonlight. Thornton took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he held a stake and hammer. "This is the only way," he said, his voice shaking. "We must drive the stakes through their hearts to release their souls and break the curse." As they prepared to perform the grim task, a sudden, bone-chilling scream echoed through the cemetery. Mary, Abigail, and Dr. Thornton froze, their eyes scanning the darkness for the source of the sound. Emerging from the shadows was a figure, tall and menacing, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The figure stepped closer, revealing its ghastly features: pale skin, elongated fangs, and eyes that burned with an unholy fire. It was the vampire, the creature responsible for the plague that had descended upon Exeter. It hissed, baring its teeth, ready to strike. Thornton tightened his grip on the stake, his resolve hardening. "Stay behind me," he whispered to Mary and Abigail. "This ends tonight." As the vampire lunged towards them, the air grew thick with a sense of impending doom. The villagers, hearing the commotion, began to gather at the edge of the cemetery, their faces pale with fear and anticipation. In that moment, The fate of Exeter hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of a knife. The true battle between the living and the undead had only just begun, and the outcome would forever alter the course of their lives. Would they succeed in vanquishing the creature and lifting the curse, or would the darkness that had claimed so many continue to spread, unchecked and unstoppable? The vampire's approach was swift, a blur in the dim moonlight, its fangs bared and ready to tear into flesh. Drive. Thornton stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest, the wooden stake held firmly in his hand. Mary and Abigail, huddled behind him, clutched each other, their faces pale and stricken with terror. The villagers, drawn by the unholy commotion, gathered at the cemetery's edge, their breath held in collective suspense. The night was thick with dread, and the fog seemed to wrap around them like a cold, clammy shroud. As the vampire lunged, Dr. Thornton thrust the stake forward with all his might. The creature twisted in midair, evading the blow with a supernatural grace that sent a shiver down his spine. It landed a few feet away, its glowing eyes fixed on the doctor, a cruel, mocking smile playing on its lips. "You think you can stop me, mortal?" The vampire hissed, its voice a cold, guttural rasp. "I have walked this earth for centuries, feeding on the weak and the foolish. Your resistance is futile, Doctor." Thornton steeled himself, raising the stake once more. "We'll not let you destroy our village," he declared, his voice unwavering despite the fear that gripped him. The vampire's smile widened, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Your village is already mine," it sneered. "Your lives, your souls all belong to me." Before Dr. Thornton could respond, the vampire leapt forward, moving with blinding speed. It knocked the stake from his hand, sending it skittering across the ground. Mary screamed as the vampire's cold, clawed hand closed around her throat, lifting her off the ground effortlessly. "Let her go," Abigail cried, her voice breaking with desperation. She grabbed a nearby shovel, brandishing it like a weapon, but the vampire barely spared her a glance. "Such bravery," the vampire taunted, tightening its grip on Mary's throat. "But it will do you no good." Mary's vision darkened at the edges as she struggled to breathe, her hands clawing at the vampire's iron grip. Just as she felt consciousness slipping away, a loud, resounding crack echoed through the cemetery. The vampire released Mary, staggering back with a snarl. "Drive." Thornton, having retrieved the stake, had struck it across the vampire's face with all his strength. The creature's skin sizzled where the wood made contact, smoke rising from the wound. "You will not claim her, Doctor," Thornton growled, his voice fierce with determination. He advanced on the vampire, the stake poised for another strike. The vampire's eyes blazed with fury and pain. It bared its fangs, preparing to attack once more, but before it could move, a sudden, sharp whistle pierced the air. The villagers, seeing their chance, had armed themselves with makeshift weapon stakes, shovels, anything they could find. They charged forward, a wave of humanity driven by desperation and resolve. The vampire, sensing the shift in the tide, hissed in anger and frustration. It lashed out, but the villagers pressed on, undeterred. In the chaos, Dr. Thornton saw his opportunity. With a swift, decisive motion, he drove the stake deep into the vampire's chest. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream, its body convulsing violently. For a moment, it seemed as if the very night itself recoiled from the sound. The vampire's eyes dimmed, the unholy light fading as its body crumbled to ash. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the remnants of the creature were carried away by the wind, dissolving into the night. A heavy silence settled over the cemetery. The villagers, still gripping their makeshift weapons, looked to Dr. Thornton with a mix of awe and gratitude. The doctor, exhausted but triumphant, nodded to them before collapsing to his knees, the adrenaline leaving his body in a rush. Mary, gasping for breath, was helped to her feet by Abigail. They embraced, relief washing over them in waves. The nightmare, it seemed, was finally over. But as the villagers began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves, Dr. Thornton's gaze was drawn to the graves they had disturbed. A chilling realization settled over him. The other bodies, those who had perished from the mysterious illness, still lay untouched. If the vampire had been feeding on them, as the text suggested, then why had they not decayed like normal corpses? As if sensing his thoughts, Mary turned to him, her face pale and drawn. "Doctor," she whispered, her voice trembling. What if there are more?" Dr. Thornton's heart sank. The vampire they had destroyed might have been a scout, a harbinger of a greater threat lurking in the shadows. He rose to his feet, the weight of their situation pressing heavily upon him. "We need to be vigilant," he said, his voice firm. "This might not be over." The villagers, overhearing his words, exchanged uneasy glances. Fear crept back into their hearts, but now it was tempered with a steely resolve. They had faced the darkness once and survived. They would do so again if necessary. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting long shadows across the cemetery, Dr. Thornton, Mary, and Abigail stood together, their eyes fixed on the forest that bordered their village. The true extent of the threat remained unknown, and the battle against the darkness was far from over. But they would be ready. In the days that followed, the village of Exeter fortified itself, preparing for the possibility of another attack. Drive. Thornton continued his research, seeking any information that might help them understand and combat the vampires. Mary and Abigail, along with the other villagers, took turns patrolling the perimeter, always alert, always watching. And in the depths of the forest, where the light of day barely penetrated, something ancient and malevolent stirred, its hunger growing with each passing moment. The events in Exeter had not gone unnoticed. The creatures of the night were aware of the defiance of the humans, and they would not be so easily deterred. The true horror was yet to come. The days in Exeter grew colder as autumn settled over the land. The villagers, now wary of the night, went about their daily routines with an undercurrent of tension. The fortifications around the village were strengthened, and every family kept a stockpile of wooden stakes, garlic, and holy water. Drive. Thornton spent every waking hour poring over ancient texts and consulting with neighboring towns for any hint of additional knowledge about the creatures that had plagued them. Mary and Abigail, along with a group of volunteers, maintained constant patrols. Their eyes were ever watchful, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent their hearts racing. They had survived one attack, but the fear of another loomed over them like a dark cloud. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the village, a stranger arrived in Exeter. He was tall and gaunt, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight into a person's soul. He introduced himself as Jonathan Carter, a traveler from Boston who had heard of the strange occurrences in the village and had come to offer his help. Drive. Thornton was initially wary of the stranger. The village had been through too much to trust outsiders easily. However, Jonathan spoke with a quiet authority and displayed a deep knowledge of the supernatural that intrigued the doctor. "I have encountered these creatures before," Jonathan explained. "They are not mere myths. They are ancient beings with powers we can scarcely comprehend. If we are to stand a chance, we must understand their weaknesses and their habits." As days turned into weeks, Jonathan integrated himself into the village, helping with the fortifications and sharing his knowledge. He and Dr. Thornton spent countless hours discussing strategies and poring over ancient manuscripts. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Jonathan revealed a disturbing truth. "The vampire we faced was just a minion," he said, his voice grave. "A scout, sent to test your defenses and spread fear. The true threat lies deeper in the forest, in an ancient lair where a coven of vampires dwells. They are led by a vampire lord, a creature of immense power and cunning. If we do not confront them, they will come for us, and this village will be doomed." The revelation sent a chill through Dr. Thornton. The vampire they had faced had nearly destroyed them. Facing a coven, led by a vampire lord, seemed an insurmountable challenge. But there was no other choice. They had to take the fight to the vampires before the creatures could launch another attack. Jonathan outlined a plan. They would form a small, skilled group to infiltrate the lair and destroy the vampire lord. It was a dangerous mission, but it was their only hope. Mary, ever courageous, volunteered immediately. "If we don't stop them, we'll never be safe," she said, her voice firm with resolve. Abigail, though fearful for her daughter, knew the importance of the mission. She too offered her help, unwilling to let Mary face the danger alone. Drive. Thornton, despite his reservations about Jonathan, recognized the necessity of the mission. "We will need every advantage we can get," he said. "Every weapon, every piece of knowledge. We must prepare thoroughly." The villagers, though terrified, rallied behind the plan. They crafted stakes, sharpened blades, and gathered supplies. Jonathan taught them how to make protective charms and use holy water effectively. The days leading up to the mission were filled with intense, nervous energy. Finally, the night of the expedition arrived. The group consisted of Dr. Thornton, Jonathan, Mary, Abigail, and 3 other brave villagers. Armed to the teeth and steeled by their determination, they ventured into the dark forest. Guided by Jonathan's knowledge of the terrain and the vampire's habits, the forest seemed alive with malevolent intent. Every shadow appeared to hide a threat, every rustle a potential attack. They moved silently, their senses heightened, their hearts pounding with every step. After hours of treacherous travel, they reached a clearing where the trees seemed to part unnaturally, revealing the entrance to a cave. The air around the cave was cold, unnaturally so, and the stench of decay wafted from within. "This is it," Jonathan whispered, his voice barely audible. "The lair of the vampire lord. Be on your guard." They entered the cave, their torches casting flickering light on the damp, stone walls. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The weight of centuries-old malevolence pressed down on them, testing their resolve. As they reached a large, open chamber, they saw them dozens of vampires, their eyes glowing with hunger and malice. At the center of the chamber stood a figure that radiated power and menace. The vampire lord, taller and more imposing than the others, with eyes that glowed a deep, hellish red. "Welcome, mortals," the vampire lord intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber like the tolling of a death knell. "I have been expecting you." The vampires began to close in, their movements predatory and fluid. The group tightened their formation, brandishing their weapons with trembling hands. "We have to kill him," Jonathan said urgently. "If we destroy the vampire lord, the others will weaken. Focus on him." With a roar, the vampire lord lunged forward, and the chamber erupted into chaos. "Drive!" Thornton swung his stake at the nearest vampire, while Jonathan engaged the vampire lord, their battle fierce and deadly. Mary and Abigail fought side by side, their stakes finding their marks with surprising accuracy. Despite their bravery, the vampires were relentless. The fight seemed hopeless, the sheer number of the undead overwhelming. But then, in a moment of clarity, Dr. Thornton saw an opportunity. The vampire lord, distracted by his duel with Jonathan, had left his heart exposed. With a surge of determination, Dr. Thornton broke free from the fray and charged at the vampire lord. Time seemed to slow as he plunged his stake into the creature's chest. The vampire lord's eyes widened in shock and fury, a guttural scream escaping his lips as he began to disintegrate. The other vampires, sensing their master's demise, faltered and weakened. The villagers, seizing the moment, pressed their advantage, dispatching the remaining creatures with renewed vigor. As the dust settled and the last of the vampires turned to ash, a heavy silence filled the chamber. The group, exhausted and battered, looked around in disbelief. They had done it. They had defeated the vampire lord and his coven. But their relief was short-lived. As they made their way back to the village, Jonathan, now visibly weakened, revealed the final piece of the puzzle. "This victory, though significant, is not the end," he said, his voice strained. "The vampire lord was part of a larger network of ancient creatures. There are others spread across the land, more powerful and cunning. We have merely delayed the inevitable." Dr. Thornton, Mary, and Abigail exchanged grim looks. The battle had been won, but the war against the darkness was far from over. They had proven that they could fight, that they could survive. But the true test lay ahead. As they reached the edge of the forest, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon, they knew that their journey was just beginning. The shadows of the night had been pushed back, but the threat remained. Together, they would continue to fight, to protect their village and their loved ones. The darkness would return, but so would they, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The story of Exeter was not one of despair, but of resilience. And as long as there were those willing to stand against the night, there was hope. The return to Exeter was met with both relief and renewed determination. The villagers, who had anxiously awaited their friend's return, rushed to greet them. There were tears of joy, embraces, and heartfelt gratitude. The victory over the vampire lord had lifted the immediate threat, and for the first time in months, the villagers felt a glimmer of hope. Drive. Thornton, Mary, Abigail, and Jonathan were hailed as heroes, their bravery and sacrifice celebrated by the entire community. That night, a great bonfire was lit in the village square, a symbol of their triumph over the darkness. Stories of the battle were shared, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was laughter and joy in Exeter. As the days turned into weeks, the village began to heal. The fortifications remained, a constant reminder of the threats that still lurked in the shadows, but life slowly returned to normal. Drive. Thornton continued his research, determined to uncover any information that could help protect the village from future threats. Mary and Abigail resumed their roles in the community, their bond stronger than ever after facing such immense danger together. Jonathan, though weakened by the battle, stayed in Exeter. His knowledge of the supernatural proved invaluable, and he trained the villagers in ways to defend themselves. Under his guidance, they established a militia, ready to respond to any sign of vampire activity. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves turned vibrant shades of red and gold, Dr. Thornton received a letter. It was from an old colleague, Dr. Lawrence Bellingham, who resided in Boston. Lawrence had read of their exploits and offered his assistance, bringing with him a wealth of knowledge and resources. He arrived a week later, bringing with him books, manuscripts, and a small contingent of scholars eager to help. With Lawrence's help, Dr. Thornton discovered ancient rituals and protective measures that had been long forgotten. Together, they created a series of wards around the village, symbols of protection that were said to repel dark forces. These wards were placed at strategic points, their power emanating a sense of safety and calm. As winter approached, the villagers worked tirelessly to prepare. They stockpiled food and supplies, ensuring they would be able to withstand any prolonged siege. The bonds between them grew stronger, their shared experiences forging a community united in purpose and spirit. One snowy evening, as the village gathered for a communal meal in the town hall, Jonathan stood to speak. The firelight danced on his face, casting long shadows that flickered like spirits in the night. "We have faced great evil and emerged victorious," he began, his voice steady and calm. "But our strength lies not just in our weapons or our fortifications. It lies in our unity, our determination, and our unwavering hope. As long as we stand together, there is nothing we cannot overcome." His words resonated deeply with everyone present. They knew the road ahead would not be easy, but they also knew they were not alone. Each person in the room was committed to protecting their home and their loved ones, no matter the cost. In the following months, the village of Exeter transformed. What had once been a place shrouded in fear and despair became a beacon of resilience and hope. News of their victory spread to neighboring towns, and people began to look to Exeter as an example of how to face the darkness with courage and unity. One evening, as the first signs of spring began to thaw the land, Mary and Abigail walked through the village, marveling at how much had changed. The air was filled with the sounds of children playing, and the scent of fresh bread wafted from the bakery. Life had returned to Exeter, richer and more vibrant than before. They paused at the edge of the forest, where the shadows were now less menacing, and Mary turned to her mother. "We've come so far, haven't we?" she said, a smile lighting up her face. Abigail nodded, her eyes misting with pride and relief. "Yes, we have, and we'll keep moving forward." Together, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the village, the people of Exeter gathered once more in the town square. They lit another bonfire, not as a beacon of defiance, but as a celebration of life and hope. Drive. Thornton, Jonathan, Mary, and Abigail stood together, their faces reflecting the fire's warm light. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, not just through strength and strategy, but through unity and unwavering hope. The threat of vampires had not disappeared entirely, but Exeter was ready. The village had transformed into a symbol of resilience, a testament to the strength of the human spirit. No matter what lay ahead, they would face it together, their hearts filled with the unshakable belief that, as long as they stood united, they could overcome any darkness. And so, the village of Exeter thrived, its people bound by their shared experiences and strengthened by their collective resolve. They had faced the abyss and found their way back to the light, proving that even in the darkest of times, hope and courage could prevail.